So can we say that, I mean, the type 1s are equally vulnerable when it comes to heart health, because usually we think of type 2s, but type 1s can easily fall in that category too.
Sure.
Can we then say that lower insulin levels in general, of course, given the sort of context of the person, age, muscle level, etc. But generally lower insulin levels and better control of glycemia or normal glycemia, whether you're diabetic or not, as long as these are controlled, then your risk reduces.
Yeah, it's a great statement. And I agree 100% with that statement. Now, do I have data to show that in someone without diabetes or pre-diabetes, that normalizing their insulin and normalizing their glycemia improves their outcome? I don't, data doesn't exist for that person. Not either way, right? It just hasn't been looked at. It doesn't prove that there's no benefit, but it doesn't prove that there's a benefit because it just hasn't been looked at. So I have to be honest and say that's sort of my gut instinct and kind of taking what data is out there and making my best guess. But absolutely, I think it's definitely important. But so does that mean, an A1C of 4.9 is substantially better than an A1C of 5.2? Probably not. Probably not. Does it mean, a maximum rise of your blood sugar to 105 is better than a rise to 115 if they both come down to baseline within half an hour? Probably not. Like, that degree of difference is probably not a difference. But is a 4.9 better than a 5.6 for A1C? Okay, yeah, there I'd say probably yes. And is a 110 better than a 135? Especially if that 110 comes down in half an hour and the 135 takes 90 minutes to come down, both considered normal, by the way. But yeah, to me, that makes a difference. So, it's a moving target to a degree, but I think there is a difference there.
What I've always been interested in, and again, there isn't a definitive answer to that, and I don't expect you to give me one because I know that there isn't, but I'm interested in your thoughts that it isn't necessarily where your baseline blood sugars are that's having an impact on your including heart health, but general metabolic health, but the daily and constant variability, the ups and downs and the ups and downs. I mean, I know that ruined my health. It wasn't necessarily the high A1C per se, but it was the fluctuations. And there was no way I could control it. I stopped checking my blood sugars because I knew they would always be high or higher.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's both, right? If you have a baseline of 85 versus a baseline of 120, that's a big difference, right? And if you have glycemic variations of 60 points versus variations of 30 points, that's a big difference. So I think they both have a role. Now, what's interesting is I think we've sort of ignored the glycemic variation for a long time, and it's becoming sort of more noticeable and more recognizable with CGMs, and people are starting to pay more attention to it, which I think is good. But I don't think that means we can ignore the baseline of your blood sugar either. I think they both play a significant role.
The baseline is important, and so many people who are not diabetic, for example, exhibit sort of graphs CGM when they wear a CGM. Their baseline is so higher than what I would consider normal, for example, being a type 1, but they're just under the illusion because they haven't yet been diagnosed as type 2 diabetics. So they're under the illusion they're super healthy. How do you explain to those people, for example, who are exhibiting worrying fluctuations in their blood sugars wearing a CGM, but they're not diabetic?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And it's like you can do your own glucose tolerance test just by wearing a CGM and eating meals and seeing how you respond. And if you have an elevated fasting sugar that stays elevated during the day, it's something you definitely need to pay attention to. Now, where it gets confusing is the people who have this dawn effect, where they are sort of elevated in the morning to like 110, 115, but that's the highest they see all day long. And after they eat, it comes down actually, and then they're in the 80s and 90s the rest of the day. That's very different for someone who's in the 110s, 115s all day and goes up with meals from there. Those are two very different scenarios. So that second scenario absolutely is basically, in my mind, has diabetes. They don't fit the definition maybe for type 2 diabetes, but in my mind, they need to be treated as if they have type 2 diabetes, because if they don't now, they will soon.
Dave Feldman once called it blood sugar dysregulation, because that's exactly what it is if you're having the highs and lows.
Leave it to an engineer to give it a name that actually makes sense.
It makes so much sense, and I quite like the sort of the terminology he used.